Teachers, have you ever looked up social media of past students? What's your best success story? Not me. But my teacher told us a story from when he was at another school. He was supposed to do an IT class. And he looked up all the students' names in advance and memorized them. You can imagine the shock on the students' faces. He then proceeded to data fish them by creating a fake Google login page on his own website. Of course he didn't do any harm. He just sent an email back containing their passwords. Their reaction was, well, that was a good lesson. But we wouldn't fall for this in a real life situation, to which he replied, if you didn't notice it already, this was a real life situation. Most are making their way through college and are now beginning their first jobs careers. 2 students have messaged me this last year thanking me for inspiring them to pursue performing arts careers. I've only taught at a high school level for 7 years. So I think the best is still to come. I knew a kid in high school who was doing some pretty nasty shit. Would go around smashing windows, throwing rocks at cars for fun. Later on had a really bad drug habit and got arrested for telling the cops he was robbed at gunpoint for money, when it turns out he was like beat for like an ounce of coke or something and thought he could get the other kid ducked. Recently saw an article in a finance website that quoted some of his investing tactics. Looked him up on Facebook and he's a very wealthy stockbroker or something in Nick. Edit, Grandmama. Edit 2. Maybe not broker. IDK what exactly he does. That was my assumption. I'm bad with money. Judge me. Former student here. I randomly streamed a jazz concert I was playing recently, and one of the people who tuned in was my former high school music teacher. I like this one. This is cute. My media law and ethics professor liked a 95-week-old post on my Instagram. I only noticed because I was on the app and tapped the notification as soon as I saw it. He unliked it almost immediately. 2 weeks later in class we were covering social media ethics, and in his lecture made a comment about looking us up online. Then said he was joking. He hadn't done it. But I saw that like. What kind of photo was the one he accidentally liked, if you don't mind? Yes, it was a beach pic. I was a teaching assistant for an introductory engineering class and also a physics class. I kept in tabs on some of my former students and social media, and several of them have gone on to earn graduate degrees from big name engineering schools, like UC Berkeley, and many of them recently graduated from medical school. Physics is a prerequisite for the MCAT. It's pleasing to see. One of my students was the typical stoner. Smart as hell. Easily one of my top students. He just couldn't be asked to give a duck. I pushed him in my class and he pulled an A. Apparently one of his first. He graduates and the other teachers assume that he'll be getting a dead-end job in no time. Fast forward 2 years later, I find out that he's a sales exec with a massive German shipping company on the fast track to management. He has a ridiculously hot Brazilian girlfriend. And seems like he got his shit together. I'm happy for him. Of course. I have a couple of girls I taught who came from immigrant families. The girls were both born in the US, who are both starting their master's programs this fall. One boy I taught has his own video production company. I think he's about 23 or 24 now. And he seems to do good business and get paid jobs. I was in a rough inner city charter school for most of my time teaching. So the success stories are a little harder to come by. I have more former students who had kids by the time they hit 18 than who went to college. I spent my last year teaching at a rural traditional school. And some of those kids are entering their senior year of college this year. I don't see as much from them. But I was only at that school for a year. I'm student. I found out my high school economics teacher had passed away last year from a massive stroke in her 40s. She donated her organs to 6 different people. I miss her. Not me. But a former professor of mine convinced all of his freshman sociology class that he was a medium. On the first day he called out someone's initials and asked whoever had those initials to raise their hand. He picked one of the girls with those initials and read her future. Describing her long-distance boyfriend, using his name and where he was living, and how their relationship was going to fail after he sleeps with her best friend, also using best friend's name. The girl was so freaked out she almost cried. The last day of class my professor told us he made it all up by looking up our social media, memorizing one and then supplementing a story to make it seem like he could predict the future. When I was in high school I was constantly late. Not for school, because it was 10 miles of rural roads to get there, so our only option was the school bus. I mean for class. It was on purpose. I just ducked around in the halls or outside. This meant I got sent to the deputy head's office quite a lot to be told off for it. Fast forward many years later and I'm working in my office. I have a LinkedIn page. It's proved quite useful. Many current and former colleagues have endorsed my skills. One of which is timekeeping, as I am never late for anything. Then I get a notification and see that the deputy head has endorsed me. I'm 100% sure he did it sarcastically, but it gave me a good chuckle. I'm 40, and my first group of students are turning 35 this year. All of the students I taught in high school are 30ish by now. The students I taught in college range widely between ages 20 and 65. I'm Facebook friends with lots of them, and I love that. But no, I don't look up random former students. Pretty recently I found out a kid I did my service with went on win several scholarships. Pretty proud of him because he had lots of problems in his house, but that didn't stop him. Not a teacher, but in our school we had a guy come in doing a talk on web safety and to prove a point on the importance of privacy settings on social media. He collated the most cringe-worthy photos of kids in our year whose profiles were public and showed them in front of our whole year. Needless to say, there were a few red faces afterwards lol. I have the reverse of this. So I'm a staff member at a university. I didn't want professors adding me on Facebook, so when I went to block them I took a peek at their profiles first. One older professor lady had her profile public and had thought she was searching for students, but not knowing how Facebook works, posted all these statuses with just the students' names. I had a good laugh and then blocked her. I also laughed imagining one of the students looking at her profile and thinking, what the duck, I can't believe she tried to search me. I'm late to the party, but I'm a teaching instructor for a self-contained SID elementary classroom. I've been working here for a few years and one of my first students came back in with his mother and he was walking. I know it's not as impressive as other stories, but it was so exciting to see him walking on his own. Actually, my nephew is going to the same elementary school that I did. To my surprise, the principal remembers me. When I went to a family brunch the school was having, she caught up with me and was really excited to hear my educational path and how I was doing. I didn't think I made that big an impression in elementary school to be remembered by name almost 10 years later. I'm following two piano majors, both wonderful students, who are now playing duets in concerts on a regular basis. Not only that, but just as I suspected would happen, they've announced their engagement and will marry in September. They're an attractive couple and well liked. It'll be fun to see how their careers develop. I spent 11 years teaching in a very impoverished rural area. Many of the kids came from homes with a family member incarcerated or spending time in rehab. Many had parents on disability or working multiple jobs. I had kids, this was elementary school, bring marijuana or knives to school. My first year there was the county's attempt to turn the school around. Previously, many of the teachers just let the kids do whatever they wanted. Coming into that was rough. But I am proud to say I feel like my colleagues and I made a real impact over the years. I have had several students go on to college and get great jobs or go to vocational school to get an excellent job in that field. I have run into students around town doing steady retail or blue collar jobs, making a good living. Very happy. And I am so proud. On the other hand, I have also had many students get pregnant before graduating high school and never finish. They are on welfare. Others have fallen into dealing drugs, or so I have heard. One made the news for getting into an altercation with a rival gang member. They shot at each other. Neither was hurt badly. But my former student was arrested. So, it's been a mixed bag. I've got a former student who by 18 was pregnant. Knew fake breasts and working at Hooters. I had her in 7th grade at a very expensive private school. I had a kid called Michael. Michael was a complete toe rag of a kid. I once asked him what sport it was that he applied himself to be so fit. Kid was ripped. He replied running from the cops. He also told me his family was proud generational welfare recipients and he hoped to do the same. Last I saw he was alive. Not in jail and on welfare. If one of my former students were to cure cancer, they would still not be as successful as Michael. Sorry. I hate to do this. But I'm not a teacher. As a manager, I routinely look up previous employees who have left my team or my company for various reasons. I had to let someone go a while back who I thought was a bright kid that needed direction and a lot of structure in his life. I recently looked him up on Facebook. And he's doing quite well for himself. He started his own company which is doing well. Proposed to the girl he was just starting to date when I had to let him go. And seems to really have figured some things out that were major challenges for him when I knew him. I know this isn't directly tied to the original question. But the spirit of the question is the same no matter if it's a previous employee or student. Guy I know has been a high school teacher for a long time. And a home brewer about as long, coincidentally. He opened a brewery last year. And his Facebook and Twitter feeds are full of pictures of his old students drinking his beer. It is quite good. I looked up my middle school football coach. Sent a friend request. Reply was the Facebook version of new phone who dis. My professor in college for Intro to Mythology taught Michael Jordan back when he was at UNC. The coach was always on his ass about Jordan getting his work done on time. I went to a really shitty high school. Most kids are in jail. On their third kid. Or on trial. I have my English and art teachers as friends on Facebook and they always comment on my achievements or new jobs. So I would hope that we are their success story. During my first year teaching 7/8 graders, I had an Indian student who was smart. But quiet. I told her parents that I'd like her to talk up more. The father leaned across the table. Pointed a finger at me. And said. In our culture. Girls are to be quiet and listen. They are not to speak. Now. 15 years later. She is a doctor at a prestigious hospital. I'll bet she learned to speak up very quickly. Not my story and it wasn't social media. But I was hanging out with a friend. Drinking some beers. When a former student of his recognized him and said, "Hey mister. Friend of Lurgy. How are you?" My friend had taught math at the high school level and this guy had really liked the class and decided that math was cool. He was starting his PhD in mathematics that fall. My friend had a minor moment of existential angst that a former student of his was now old enough to get a PhD. But he got over it. Student here, M. But I had a teacher in high school that was mid-20s and attractive. That was 20 years ago and she friended me on Facebook last year and is always commenting flirty stuff on my posts. I make zero attempt to hide the fact that I am happily married with a family. It's really strange. We didn't even have any sort of unique friendship back then. It's weird that she looked me up all these years later. And she's only friends with a handful of students. I wish certain teachers of mine would look at mine. Not that I'm super successful but I'm a civil engineer with a good career and job. Nothing braggable but I had multiple teachers at different levels, college, high school, middle school, tell me I would amount to nothing. In their defense I was never the most studious. Not me. My mom. Who was a teacher before I was born. She had Rodney Harrison, NFL player for the Patriots, in one of her classes. She told me a story about a shy but athletic and good looking kid who, when she assigned the class to track how much water they use at home, told my mom that his family couldn't afford their water bill and it had been shut off. My mom gave him an A. He kept it up in school. And on it went.